Marilyn Monroe had no justice. She did not commit suicide, no way. This was an intentional drugging. This was an intentional murder. It's a bunch of bullshit. What the hell happened?
I was on fire for you. Where did you go? I could have died for you. How could you not know? I was alive with you. You brought in the cold. Was I being lied to? Wish I never met you. Starting to regret you.
We're gonna start today's episode off at the chapel that Marilyn Monroe had her burial service in 1962.
Cry for me, I'm a fighter. Fighter. You can't take my voice from me. I will rise up. Rise up. So what are you waiting on? I ain't ready to die yet. The pain is weapon.
Good morning, Marilyn. How are you? I've got some news for you. You don't have to worry anymore. We know who did this to you. We know what happened. Everything's gonna be okay. You could rest in peace now. Hey guys, TVG here reporting from Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park in Westwood, California. As of today's recording, it's March 26th, 2023 at around 7 a.m. Today's video is going to be the most important episode I've ever made in my entire life. I'm going to explain to you why the district attorney in Los Angeles, California in 1962 didn't file charges against Marilyn Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, for the domestic violence, the passion killing, the premeditated murder of Marilyn Monroe. I'm going to explain to you who Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, truly was and what he was really doing in the 1960s. I'm going to show you beyond a reasonable doubt how he planned the murder, how he carried out the murder, and how he covered his tracks from the day of the killing, from the first day after, from a week after, to a year after, to right now, 60 years later. Why it's such a big mystery. I'm going to take you over to Beverly Hills where Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD's office was, where Marilyn was going to her psychiatrist appointments. Then I'm going to take you over to the death house, the death location where Marilyn Monroe was killed and murdered. And then finally I'm going to take you downtown to where she had her autopsy. Let's take a look and see what we can find. Okay guys, I'm here in Beverly Hills. I'm outside the office right there. That's the building that Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson had his office. And he'd meet with numerous women here. This was not his first rodeo, okay? 436 Roxbury Drive, and this is where Marilyn Monroe would come for her appointments. She came here the last couple of months leading up to the end of her life. Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, was a millionaire. He was the most well-known physician in his field. He was one of the top professional psychiatrists, psychoanalysts in the world. So people in Beverly Hills would come here to meet with him. He was giving out prescriptions to all types of people, and he realized that, you know, he was in a power position. He started to exercise his disgusting criminal behavior. He was a predator, and he's one of the first to rape women, date rape. Like nowadays, the clubs, people put things in drinks and they knock these girls out. They rape them, they rob them, and that's what he was doing. He was knocking them out and he was date raping them. She didn't know he was a predator, okay? That his crimes were escalating and that he was meeting numerous people, doing this to numerous people, like Bill Cosby and many others. But in the 1960s, no one knew what the hell this was. This was before anyone knew anything. And he was a doctor, and he knew that if he gave him this much of this pill or this much of this medication, that they won't even remember in the morning. So he can do whatever he wants to them. And he took full advantage of that. And that's what Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, was doing in the 1960s, before anybody. That's who he was. Using his authority as an MD, a doctor, he would convince her that she had a sleeping disorder, that she has a sleeping problem, when she probably didn't. He would put her to sleep with barbiturates. He would have inappropriate relations with her, sexual relations, rape her, and she had no idea what was going on for a long period of time. He was working at a UCLA. So when he first met Marilyn Monroe, he invites her to his house, his home office, to impress her with his $6 million house. Then he invites her, you know, to his office here on Roxbury Drive in Beverly Hills. And she's impressed, okay? Up until the last couple of months of her life, they were meeting here. But when he backdated the bills for the creditors and the last day, he met with her at her house. And if you look at the bills, it's very suspicious. She's dead. She has no voice. And he just goes ahead and covers up with all the paperwork. She had no shot. If you look at the bills, it proves that he's guilty, okay? If we can get a forensic audit on his bills, it would prove so much. Marilyn Monroe was a budding star, a budding talent, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had no idea that she was working with a predator, preying on vulnerable women who came to him to get help. They couldn't sleep, they had insomnia, or whatever the case may be. They trust this guy. He's a licensed professional. He's recommended. And Marilyn Monroe ends up working with him for 2 years. And those 2 years were the worst 2 years of her life. He got her so sick. I've never seen her so sick in my life. You ever watch the videos? And she was just a beautiful young lady who was working on her acting career, that had a very tough upbringing and was not looking to run into this kind of trouble, okay? She was in her 30s, he was in his 50s, almost retirement age. What do you think he was doing with her for those 2 years? Her career was on the rise. And when you study her background, she was a classical thespian, an actress that was learning from Lee Strasberg. She flew to New York. She was an incredible actress. I mean, but someone that you'd be proud of, someone that like did it the right way, the hard way, and was working her way up the ladder. And then she was making movies, she was in perfect condition, and then all of a sudden she's going up, up, up. She's doing everything right. She's a great person. She's much more conservative than anyone gives her credit for. Doing everything right, going up the ladder. And then all of a sudden she meets this piece of shit. And she gets completely sick. And she was 34 years old when she met him, and at 36 she dies. So for those 2 years, those are the worst 2 years of her life. If she could take it back, she would. He had her so hooked and got her so sick, and she was on her deathbed. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, and then he starts to work her through the process that a criminal, a predator would do, and she's falling for it. And he's giving her pills and he's knocking her to sleep, and then he's having inappropriate sexual relations with her. And this is going on for 2 years. And she doesn't have a dad around, or this guy would get his fucking ass kicked. Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson invited Marilyn Monroe to his house, to his home office for a long time. She went up to his house, She was getting close with his family, and she didn't realize he got scared and did not want her over at the house anymore. She was putting herself in harm's way. Like, she didn't realize like that was going to get her killed. I think his wife was getting jealous. That's why they started meeting here at the office. He starts to up her medication, up her dose, and she's getting sick and sicker than ever, and more addicted. I've never seen someone so sick in my life. 2 years of abuse. He tortured her. It was terrible. She starred in movies and met Peter Lawford, who was related to one of the Kennedys. So they're having these incredible parties in Santa Monica Beach at the Peter Lawford house. She met the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. She was asked to sing Happy Birthday for him, and who was a little too old for her, so he introduced her to his younger brother, Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States, and they hit it off. And they started to meet up every once in a while, like any young couple would do, or any young person, okay? Very normal. They were, I think, the same exact age, and they hit it off, and maybe they would have been together. She talked about him a lot. Marilyn was just a young girl, I mean, up and coming. Just imagine when you were in your 30s, you met people on rendezvous. You'd fly into places, you'd drive places, you'd meet with them. There's nothing suspicious about that. And these people were just good-natured people who liked her and she liked them in the course of business, in the course of being a movie star and being a public figure. Nothing out of the ordinary. She finally decided, you know, he might be the problem here. She was smart enough to figure out, this guy is the problem here. I'm gonna get rid of him. But she was so addicted, she still needed his help, you know, but she told him to back off. She trusted him to be professional, to back off. And he realized, like, I can't get away with what I was getting away with before. She's young. She decides, you know, I'm going to move on. I don't want to do this anymore. And a lot of great stuff was happening for her. And she realized, like, this guy's getting me completely sick. You know, the last 2 years of her life, she was deathly ill because of this guy. Had her hooked on so many pills and drugs. So she's going to leave him. And that scared the crap out of him. And he realized, my wife and kids are going to find out about this, and I'm going to lose everything. You can't rape women under the influence of drugs after you knock them out on barbiturates. It's just against the law. So he realized that, you know, he's going to have to take care of Marilyn Monroe and eliminate the threat. So when he had the opportunity, he had his briefcase packed already. He had an agenda, and it was completely different than hers. He's dealing with the studios at this point, and he's in a power position, and it was a big deal. He was being left behind. He didn't want that to happen, and he felt left out and not a part of. And he felt like he deserved, or he worked his way into that position when in fact he didn't. He was just asked to help Marilyn out, and her career without him, he was in control. He was a narcissist, and he was on top of his game, and nothing could get in his way. And he was invincible and unstoppable. Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson already took everything from her. She had nothing left. Poor girl. Norma Jean Mortensen, who's now Marilyn Monroe. A sweet, beautiful, young lady who's an incredible talent, whose life is snuffed out by a piece of shit, a scumbag fucking doctor who fucking gets her addicted on pills. He was called up to her house that night on August 4th, 1962, and he brought his case ready to go with the intent to murder Marilyn Monroe when he had the opportunity. And he had one shot. He was out of the picture, but they needed his help. He was just a jealous, scorned lover. He can't handle it, and he decides that he's going to murder her. That's it. Simple. So he packed his death kit And he knows this is it. Once Marilyn Monroe, this last time, once he gets this opportunity, this might be the last time he has. He prepared. He knew he was going to kill her. He decided. He was angry. He packed his briefcase, which is his work kit, his rape kit. He had his enema apparatus in there with his vials of barbiturates in liquid form and syringes, and he was ready to go. He had his pill bottles, and he knew when he got to the house, when they needed a little help, he was gonna put her to sleep and he was gonna murder her. So this is a first degree, premeditated murder of Marilyn Monroe. Takes the enema kit, he opens the case, and he takes her life. I'm gonna take you over to the house, the death house, where Marilyn Monroe was murdered. The only house she ever owned. She just bought that house. She was just moving in. She was so proud of it. Given the opportunity, when she was knocked out, he murdered her so that no one would know what he was doing. She didn't realize this piece of shit was a predator and was gonna take her life unknowingly. And that's what happened. She ran into a predator, the wrong guy, okay? The wrong guy. And he took her life. It might not have started that way, but that's how it ended. Let's continue.
I will rise up. Rise up. So what are you waiting?
Okay guys, I'm here in Los Angeles on 5th Helena Drive, and at the end of this street right here, this is where Marilyn Monroe owned her first home, and she was murdered by her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, right here in her own home on August 4th, 1962, leading up into the evening of August 5th, 1962. And she was having a really rough time that night. So they had called Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, to come down here to help Marilyn Monroe out. And as you can see, it's all being renovated. We're talking about $6 to $10 million at least. I mean, this is an incredible area. He knew how to get to Marilyn Monroe. They both smoked cigarettes. He exploited that because he had that in common with her. And he was doing anything he could to manipulate so that he can commit his crimes. And Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson inserted himself into her life, not just personally, but professionally, with the studios and everyone that she's dealing with. He actually helped her buy this house. He hired Eunice Murray, the housekeeper. He hired Norman Jeffries, the handyman. So he was completely in control of Marilyn Monroe's life. Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson gets the phone call. Marilyn needs help, because they thought he knew her better than anybody. And he didn't. She knew something was up. And she was moving away from him, and he was being left behind. But she had already fired him. But she thought, and everyone thought, he was a professional, and he would come and help her out and still back off, because she wanted him to back off. She was moving forward in her life without him. And when you're in your 30s, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's a completely normal thing to do. So Marilyn Monroe wasn't even really going to see Dr. Greenson anymore. So this was his opportunity. He had one shot at this, but he already knew he was going to take Marilyn Monroe out. And when he got up here, he did what he had to do, and he left. 12305. This is the house, guys. Marilyn Monroe was murdered in this house right here. Comes up this right here, and he parks inside that gate. And he has his death kit already packed. And he rushes in. Marilyn needs help. He orchestrates the scene. He hired Eunice Murray, who is the housekeeper, and Norman Jeffries, who's the handyman. And Pat Newcomb was Marilyn Monroe's press agent. So those three were in the house at the time when Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, showed up. That's when he executed his plan. He told Pat Newcomb to leave, her press agent, that Marilyn was not doing well. And the only two remaining people in the house were people that he hired, that he could manipulate. Eunice Murray and Norman Jeffries. He's using those people to be witnesses to cover up his crime. Choreographing 2 witnesses. And the only way this works, the witnesses do not know. You got to understand. He sets the witnesses in motion. They have no idea. That's how he pulled it off. And he gives her some sleeping pills. And while he knocked her out, he quickly removes the enema apparatus, the syringes, the barbiturates in liquid form. His syringe filled it with the liquid barbiturate, which is sleeping pills. He fills it into the enema, and then he enters the enema into Marilyn Monroe while she's knocked out, and then stages the scene, and he leaves. He locks the door behind, leaving Marilyn Monroe's dead body to be found later. So he locks the door, the bedroom door, to where Marilyn is, as if she locked the door, distancing himself from the crime. And then he leaves, knowing that it's going to take a couple of hours for what he did to take effect. Tells them not to bother Marilyn. He tells them, don't bother Marilyn, she's not doing well. And of course, Eunice Murray goes in and checks on Marilyn, and she finds her dead of an overdose. So she quickly calls the doctor, Dr. Ralph Greenson. So he comes running down here like he's going to save the day. He comes running like he's Superman. I'm going to break the window, and I'm going to go in there and save Marilyn Monroe, when in fact he killed her. He already locked the door. So he has to break the window to build an alibi, so that they have 2 witnesses saying that she overdosed. He wasn't even in the house. The door was locked, so he had to break the window. So there's no way that he could have been involved, okay? But he's the one. He's the one that administered the enema, the deadly concoction of barbiturates that killed Marilyn Monroe. She'd already been dead. When it was a lie, he actually came here and premeditated and killed Marilyn Monroe. Dr. Greenson was panicking. Even though he planned to murder her, once you put the plan in effect, all hell broke loose. There's things he didn't expect. So Dr. Greenson circumvents the system. He quickly calls for an ambulance.
We took Marilyn Monroe in on an overdose.
The ambulance comes and takes the dead body. So he has an ambulance come, picks the body up, drives the body all over town.
Marilyn had just killed herself. And take a camera. I saw them wheel the body into a very small closet. And I took a picture of Marilyn in that closet. This is that picture.
She ends up at the cemetery in Westwood in a closet. Dr. Ralph Greenson starts to call everyone and anyone he knows. He hits the alarm. He wants everyone to know Marilyn Monroe overdosed. And he gets Dr. Curfey on the phone, the chief medical examiner, and the coroner's office downtown. And he was a friend of his. He knows him from being doctors in Los Angeles, the medical circle, the circuit. And they happen to be friends. And Dr. Curfey says, as long as you got the witnesses, as long as you call the police, as long as you tell them the same story you told me, the coroner says, do it the right way. We can't take the body. You have to call 911, you have to call the police, you have to go through the proper channels. But you have 2 witnesses. She locked herself in her room. The door was locked from the inside, of course. You'll be fine. Do it the right way and I'll help you out. So he calls everybody and he can't get anyone to take the body. Everyone said you got to return the body back to the house. No one would accept Marilyn Monroe's dead body. So they actually have to return the body back to this house. They bring back the body. The ambulance brings back the body. So the body was picked up by an ambulance, taken away, brought back. So he takes back the body, he stages it, and he calls 911, knowing that he might have a shot, that he's got to do it the right way. That's the only way people are going to help him. And they stage the scene, they call 911, and then when Sergeant Clemens comes, after the 911 call, he knows something's wrong. He can't figure it out. He knew something wasn't right, but Dr. Greenson had the 2 witnesses already. So Dr. Greenson was lying the whole time. He had 2 witnesses right there. And he says, I have witnesses. She did this, she overdosed. Based on what he has, they can't go forward at that time. And Once Dr. Greenson saw the investigation was moving away from him, he got more brazen, more bold, more cocky, and he started to push back as if he was an innocent man, which he wasn't. He called the police at 4:30 a.m. He says he lies and that they were actually found the body at 12, at midnight, 12:30, which we know is a lie because she was dead at 9:10 p.m. on August 4th, 1962. Those are the facts. That's what we found out. She actually died on August 4th, 1962, because when he called the ambulance, she was already dead, and there's nothing that the police could do at that time based on what they had. Sergeant Clemens knew something was up, but he couldn't figure it out, and it ate him up his whole life until he died. So imagine that, you show up to work one day, and then your whole life is turned upside down, and you're just trying to do your job because of some wacko doctor. Was so evil. He was getting more brazen and cocky, and he started to go on a campaign with a couple of the worst personal, private recordings of Marilyn Monroe and him, therapy tapes, damage her character in private sessions to prove that he wasn't guilty. After that day, days later, months later, years later, he goes on a campaign to try to help solve the case. He's trying to help the police and show people that she didn't commit suicide.
I can't explain myself or defend myself without revealing things that I don't want to reveal. I just spoke to Bobby Kennedy.
So he went as far as committing the crime, covering it up, having the two witnesses, staging the scene, circumventing the scene by calling an ambulance, muddying the water so they would have trouble filing charges, then went as far as playing tapes on a campaign against Marilyn Monroe, and then he goes around trying to help solve the crime and show people that she didn't commit suicide. He flexes his muscle as far as being a doctor in Los Angeles and the community, and he gets away with murder. So it's a tragedy. It's a sad situation. So at the end of the night, they finally take Marilyn away. So I'm going to take you downtown to the coroner's office where she had her autopsy in 1962. Let's continue.
I'm a fighter. You can't take my voice from me. I will rise up. So what are you waiting on? I ain't ready to die yet. The pain is what burns this.
Okay guys, I'm downtown Los Angeles at the Hall of Justice building. And in 1962, this is where Marilyn Monroe had her autopsy. In 1994, we had the Northridge earthquake, so the building was closed and renovated for 20 years. So when they reopened it, the coroner's office moved. But back in 1962, this is where it was, in the basement. And they had a jail here too. The sheriff's department is here. The district attorney in Los Angeles is here. This is a beautiful building. This is a very famous, well-known building. It's been used in many TV shows and movies. It had a jail and it held a lot of prisoners, famous prisoners. And it had a coroner's office. And it did a lot of autopsies of a lot of famous people. And Marilyn Monroe's autopsy was done here in 1962. And the chief medical examiner's name was Dr. Curfey, Theodore Curfey. The next day, the deputy coroner had a note on his desk, and it told him that he was going to be doing the autopsy of Marilyn Monroe. And he was surprised. But at the time, Dr. Theodore Curfey was the chief medical examiner, and he was supposed to do all the autopsies. And this was outside of protocol. That was out of procedure. And the body wasn't even here yet. It was brought to the wrong place. Dr. Thomas Yamaguchi had to retrieve the body. It was finally brought here, and he did the autopsy.
Dr. Thomas Noguchi performed the autopsy on Monroe's body.
There was nothing indicated that is suicide without any question. For example, there was no suicide note, and certainly it is not typical suicide scene.
Also at the autopsy was John Miner.
I represented the bridge between the district attorney's office and the coroner's office. I should have called for a criminal investigation. It was apparent from the kind of discolorations that were present that the body had been moved after death, perhaps more than once.
And the findings were that her lower portion of her large intestines were discolored, her rectal, and that her rectum and the anus were swollen. They took no pills orally, no capsules. There was no oral discoloration.
How did the barbiturate get into her? The capsule has a yellow dye. On opening the stomach, there was no dye stain. With that massive amount of intake, there would have been undissolved capsules. She would have died before all of those capsules had been absorbed. So the notion of oral intake of the barbiturate simply does not scientifically stand up. It just didn't happen that way.
They checked for needle marks under magnification, and there was no needle marks.
We examined her body and found no needle mark whatsoever. So it can be ruled out that the barbiturate that killed her was administered by means of a hypodermic injection.
And the only way, the conclusion, was an enema.
One of the findings at the autopsy was that the lower portion of the colon, which is the large intestine, was discolored. It was a deep purplish color. If by means of the barbiturate coming through the use of an enema, the medical facts would be satisfied.
So the findings were an enema is the only possible way, and Dr. Greenson was a trusted servant.
The toxicologist found a 13% reading of the barbiturate in her liver, so that from the time she began absorbing the Nembutal until the time that she died, there was an appreciable period of time, probably not less than an hour or two.
And it was a very intimate crime, and she trusted him, and that was a deadly mistake.
I don't know who killed her. I just know she didn't kill herself, so someone must have killed her.
He took advantage while she was knocked out, unconscious, and he administered a fatal dose, a concoction of barbiturates, anally, through an enema, to kill her. And he got away with it. The perfect crime. All the records, all the samples go missing. What the hell's going on here?
All of those tissues that Dr. Noguchi carefully preserved and put into jars, almost all the evidence have been destroyed, removed, or thrown away, or disappeared.
At the time I found out specimen had been disposed, I was surprised.
It's all gone. What the fuck is this bullshit? When the chief medical examiner, Dr. Theodore Curfey, gets the autopsy, he couldn't believe his eyes, because he knew right there Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, had administered an enema. He knew it. He knew it. And he did nothing about it. And that's why all the evidence, the records, the files, and Marilyn Monroe's private diary went missing. Or maybe there was a bribe. And we'll never know. And then the chief medical examiner, Dr. Theodore Curfey, has the coroner's aide, Lionel Grandison, sign the death certificate of Marilyn Monroe, knowing it's incomplete, knowing it's missing files, and missing all the samples, knowing that they lost the diary, and he forces them to sign it, knowing it's incomplete.
My name is Lionel Grandison, and I was a deputy's coroner's aide at the time of Marilyn Monroe's death. I believe that there was a cover-up of Marilyn Monroe's death, but I know, based upon my particular involvement in it, that there was a cover-up of some of the information to the public, and I signed her death certificate. The person who signs the death certificate, is their responsibility to look through the file, be sure that all the information there pertaining to the death is in the file, and that if it's not, you go and seek it out. But supposedly, when it gets to that desk, that all the information is there. But in Marilyn's case, it was not there. So, looking to do my job again, I went through the suicide team's report, the medical examiner's report, the toxicologist's report, all the various reports that are supposed to be a part of a folder. Okay, I went to seek them out. And everywhere I went, I found that there was no information on it. Why should I sign a death certificate without the information? But when I went to Dr. Curfey to ask him about this file, he told me that it was not my responsibility to ask questions about it, to sign the death certificate. No one in the office ever saw this report from the suicide team. At the time when Dr. Curfey told me to sign the death certificate, that was one of the specific questions I asked him. What about the report from the suicide team? Okay? He said that we were covered by the fact that we stated probable suicide.
What the hell is that crap? Dr. Curfey took 14 days to release his findings. Doesn't announce his findings for 14 days? What the fuck is this? And then Dr. Curfey goes on TV and announces it live, and all he did was do personal attacks on Marilyn Monroe. Had nothing to do with the facts.
She experienced severe fears and frequent depressions. Mood changes were abrupt and unpredictable. In our investigation, they state, we have learned that Miss Monroe had often expressed wishes to give up, to withdraw, and even to die.
And then when you hear him on public television, all it is personal attacks on Marilyn Monroe, one after the other after the other. And she's dead. And they're all lies. Because he knew when he saw the autopsy that Greenson lied. And he did nothing about it. And he wanted it to go away. Was there money that exchanged hands during that 14 days?
Unusual for a person with a history like Marilyn Monroe's to be able to get a prescription for a drug like Nembutal in the volume she got it?
I don't think it's unusual, sir, no.
Would you?
I'm a
prescription of large drugs?
I am not concerned with those problems. I don't think it'd be fair for me to answer that question. That's the old automatic. The $64,000 question.
You raise an...
Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, was a millionaire. He could have easily paid off the chief medical examiner. Why'd all the evidence, the files, the records, the diary go missing? Why? These are facts. Look it up. The chief medical examiner, Dr. Theodore Curfey, when he retires, he works for the Suicide Prevention Center. Like if he's an expert to cover his tracks, because he was guilty. What the hell was going on back then? 1962. Get your shit together. Damn. Marilyn Monroe got railroaded, man. Holy moly. They couldn't go forward with the case because everything was gone. So now you know why Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, got away with murder. And he got away with murder. And Marilyn Monroe got no justice, none. The biggest actress in American history and the world got no justice. No justice for Marilyn. And that's why the District Attorney of Los Angeles and California didn't file charges against Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD. If in 1962 we had cell phone data and GPS coordinate footprints and tracking, Dr. Ralph Romero Greenson, MD, would be dead to rights. Sad day in America when you can't get any justice because he had 2 witnesses and no one could point a finger at him. It's just a shame. Rest in peace.
You can't take my voice from me. I will rise up. Rise up. So what are you waiting on? I ain't ready to die yet. The pain is where faith is born. Are you alive yet? Are you alive yet? Are you alive? Are you
That's gonna do it for today's episode. If you like this video, please give it an old thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and share it with a friend if possible. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. TVG, out.
I was on fire.